17 years ago, 60 Minutes first examined the so-called French paradox, which suggested that the French, despite a high-fat diet and high consumption of wine, had a remarkably low incidence of heart disease compared with Americans. Most researchers agreed that there was something in the wine that offered protection. And a few years later, even the highly cautious federal dietary guidelines say that moderate consumption of red wine can be beneficial. Now, scientists across the country have identified a substance in red wine called resveratrol that they believe might do more than just protect the heart, but could, in very high concentrations, significantly extend life by preventing a number of age-related illnesses. If they're right, we all may soon be taking a pill that could give us an extra decade or two of healthy old age.
If the promise holds true, I think this has the chance to change healthcare.
Dr. Christoph Westphal says we all may soon be taking a drug that just might beat the clock, a simple pill that could delay the inevitable.
Our goal is to prevent and forestall many of the diseases that strike us as we reach 50, 60, and 70, all with one pill.
What you're suggesting is there's some kind of rejuvenation drug that turns a 70-year-old into a 35-year-old.
That might be pretty hard to do, but I think if we're on a train heading one direction, we can slow down that train. I think we can slow down these genes that control the aging process.
That quest to put death on hold began in 2003 when Westphal met David Sinclair, a biochemist at Harvard, who was studying the genetic components of aging.
5 years ago, I met David, and he had shown that you could extend lifespan in yeast. That's pretty exciting. Now,
if you happen to be a yeast, it's very exciting. Yeasts are one thing, human beings are more complicated. So Sinclair focused on a gene present in almost all life forms, the sirtuin gene. It's normally inactive, but when it is active, Sinclair believes it triggers a survival mechanism that extends life. Convinced that something in nature could activate that gene, Sinclair randomly tested thousands of compounds. And bingo, he got a hit, resveratrol.
When I Googled this resveratrol, I was shocked to find that red wine was the top hit.
Red wine is brimming with resveratrol. It's found in high concentration in the skin of the grape and seems to play a role in protecting it from invading bacteria and fungi. Were you aware of the research into red wine that it offered certain health benefits?
Oh, sure. I mean, that's why I almost fell off my chair when the link was made, and I thought that this was a potential explanation for the benefits of red wine.
Convinced they were on the verge of a major scientific breakthrough, Sinclair and Westphal launched Certris, a Cambridge, Massachusetts research company. They, along with a handful of other cutting-edge biotech companies, are developing resveratrol-based drugs that they believe zero in on the longevity gene.
The important news here is not that we found something in red wine. The important thing is that we passed a milestone where we can now make drugs based on this knowledge and potentially slow down aging itself.
Everyone from plastic surgeons to your friendly snake oil salesman have been promising a ticket to eternal youth for some time. So the prospect of a prescription pill based on red wine that could trigger a longevity gene sounds too good to be true. And yet, scientists have actually known for years of one surefire way of doing that. Stay hungry.
Eating a lot of food turns that off. Dieting, extreme dieting, turns it on.
These rhesus monkeys are on a major diet. For nearly 2 decades now, they've been taking in a good 30% fewer calories than their well-fed brothers and sisters. It's feeding time, I gather.
Feeding time.
They're the centerpiece of a National Institutes of Health study at the University of Wisconsin on whether or not CR, calorie restriction, makes them healthier and extends their lives. To maintain their sterile environment, we had to suit up to visit them with Ricky Coleman, the project leader.
These are 2 of our control animals here.
They are nearing the end of a typical monkey lifespan, about 27 years, and major differences in their overall health are becoming clear. The difference is really obvious.
Right.
The skinny monkeys actually look younger, their coats are shinier, and fewer have arthritis. And those chunky monkeys, many have diabetes, and a significantly higher number have cancer and heart disease. Pound for pound, the lighter guys
Do better.
do much better.
Right.
Dr. Richard Weindruck, who heads up the study, believes that calorie restriction turns on these monkeys' genetic survival switch. A hungry life seems to lead to a longer life.
There is an emerging survival advantage for the monkeys on caloric restriction, and 50% of the normally fed animals have died, and maybe 25% of those on caloric restriction.
That's a pretty remarkable number. Surely those are strong indications that a restricted calorie intake among humans would be extremely beneficial.
It appears to support that idea.
But our record as humans in staying on diets is pretty miserable.
And worsening.
So it's a fat chance that we'll all be giving up our passion for greasy junk. We consume tons more calories than we need. But believe it or not, there are some Americans who just revel in their hunger.
I basically just have one meal a day.
Meet the Skinnies, members of CRS, the Calorie Restriction Society, a group that's been severely restricting their calories for years now. They're also part of a Washington University study to see if humans mimic the monkeys. Does this kind of self-denial make them live longer, healthier lives? We joined them for what they call happy hour.
So this is in the spirit of a Bloody Mary.
Though you might regard it as an unhappy hour, a cocktail of low-calorie soup for starters, and walnuts and baby food, green bean puree on flour-free bread to top off this feast fit for a flea.
If I'm hungry, I know, number one, that I have done what I meant to do. I've eaten less than my body thought it wanted.
So far, the participants have lowered their blood pressure, reduced body fat, and lessened risk factors for heart disease, diabetes, and even cancer. And what's more, to one husband anyway, starvation has its sexy side.
To be honest, if you saw her without any clothes, she looked pretty darn good, like a woman of many, many years younger.
Their emissaries travel the world, spreading the faith and the word. Hunger turns on the survival gene.
I would like to live to be 100.
The Skinnies may not die young, but given their diet, they just might die of boredom. But if the scientists at Certus are on the right track, it could mean forget dieting, forget the sweaty business of working out. Just pop a pill and you are in guilt-free couch potato paradise.
We have a pill that can mimic many of the effects of calorie restriction or exercise.
So one can be very healthy and obese at the same time.
Our goal is healthy individuals, ideally via lifestyle, and if that doesn't work, we believe that we'll have a pill that can mimic that.
A pill that, in effect, diets for you. A pill that turns on the survival gene.
And what we're trying to do with our drugs here is to put the body in a defensive state, to ring the alarm bells and get the body to defend itself. Instead of dieting to set the alarm off, pop a pill.
The pill is a highly concentrated form of resveratrol, a virtual vineyard of healthy living. How much red wine would you have to drink to get the kind of resveratrol that you're using?
The sad news is that you'd need to drink about 1,000 bottles a day of red wine, which I don't recommend.
The pill itself may not extend lifespan, but could prevent the diseases of aging, Alzheimer's, diabetes, heart disease, even cancer.
What we're talking about is activating the body's natural genetic defenses against diseases. And that's very powerful if we can harness that.
Resveratrol has been tested on mice and the results have been encouraging. In this test video provided by Certus, both of the mice have been fed a high-fat diet for 12 weeks. But when placed on a treadmill, the mouse on the right ran twice as far. He was taking high concentrations of resveratrol.
You have fat mice and you have fat mice with resveratrol. And the ones that are on resveratrol, they can run twice as far and they live longer, about 20% longer.
Other studies showed that among mice fed a high-fat diet, those given resveratrol didn't gain as much weight as those not given the drug. Sinclair believes that resveratrol actually changes the physiology of the mice. The proof, he says, is in the post-mortem.
Their organs looked pristine, youthful, fat-free, and their physiology was just like they were dieting, but they were fat.
Convinced they were on the right path, they fast-tracked the drug into human trials on people with untreated diabetes, and the results were impressive. It significantly lowered glucose and insulin levels without the patients changing their diet or taking any other drugs.
Originally, our hope was that you'd be able to prevent diseases of aging. What we ended up seeing is actually you could therapeutically intervene in patients who have diseases of aging, and that was unexpected.
Yeah, the diabetic patients have high blood sugar, and the molecules bring it down. That's treatment, that's not prevention.
Sirtris is now developing what they say is a much more potent synthetic version of resveratrol that will also soon go into human trials, this time on cancer patients.
I keep on thinking, you know, what used to seem like it was science fiction, I actually believe the biology is right, and if we're right, this may be the most important thing that we're going to do in our lives.
Possibly, but it is important to remember that 9 out of 10 drugs that look good in mice ultimately fail in human trials. Still, the speed and results generated by Sirtris and the resveratrol drugs are unusual, and Sinclair believes these drugs will not only keep people living longer, but will keep them healthy longer.
What we're talking about is potentially making a 90-year-old as healthy as a 60-year-old. A 90-year-old can play tennis and see their great-grandkids graduate from college. People will live active, healthy lives and then die quietly in their sleep, and that's really the aim here with these medicines.
Are we on the edge of maintaining active lives into our hundreds, for example?
Well, we've certainly passed a corner in terms of the science, and someone's going to achieve it, and if it's not us, it's going to be someone else.
But the question that most of us want answered is, when do we get this pill?
I would say 5 years, to be conservative, that this will happen within our lifetimes. I'm fairly certain about that.
One measure of the potential of this research, Dr. Sinclair and Dr. Westfall's little startup company was recently bought by the pharmaceutical giant GlaxoSmithKline for almost $750 million. Here at 60 Minutes, we're pretty proud that we're now beginning our 42nd year on the air. But as broadcasts go, we're merely middle-aged compared with the oldest established permanent floating soap opera ever broadcast. Guiding Light is just finishing its 72nd year, and sadly for its fans, this Friday's broadcast will be its last. Since Franklin Roosevelt's second term as president, Guiding Light has served up an endless menu of torrid love affairs, heartbreak, infidelities by the score, double crosses, kidnaps, suicides, sin, sex, and salvation. In all, 20,000 episodes of life on the precipice. What pushed Guiding Light over the edge is that old grim reaper of all television shows, low ratings.
It's a bummer. Guiding Light should never have been taken off the air.
Passe, take one.
It's a bittersweet time these last days as hardcore fans and the show's entire staff turned up for the taping of the final scenes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for watching.
Guiding Light has always been a loving reflection of America's morals, manners, and marital mayhem, where actress Tina Sloan and many others have worked together for over a quarter century. Were you guys surprised when the show got the pink slip?
The pink slip stunned us, all of us. Even though we were on life support and we knew we were on life support, we just couldn't imagine anyone would pull the plug on their watch on a show that's been so historic.
The Guiding Light, the longest-running dramatic show in the history of broadcasting.
It started on radio in 1937, made the transition to television in 1952. And through the years, into a new century, Guiding Light chronicled family life in the mythical town of Springfield, where everybody, it seemed, had a dark secret.
If you even consider telling Billy about the baby, I will never, never forget it.
A place where even the good guys have a lurid past.
Sit down.
Let me take you through some of your planting evidence.
Yes.
Bribery.
Sure.
Blackmail.
Yeah.
And all this done by a former preacher.
Yes. And your point would be?
For the better part of a quarter century, Robert Newman and Kim Zimmer have played Springfield's star-crossed lovers, Josh and Reva.
Is this what you want? I told you to stay away from me. I warned you to stay away from me.
Marrying and divorcing each other 3 times, and that's just for starters.
Take care of his
He
family.
married my sister.
She married my father and my brother. Are we going to have this conversation now?
How many marriages have you had?
I believe I just had my 9th.
She once survived driving off a bridge in a fit of postpartum depression.
I can't believe this is happening.
He once had her clone.
Sit.
On the soaps, the weird and the wonderful are routine.
Whoa! You know, if I just run into my whole family in the Caracas airport on Christmas Eve, I'd stop and chat.
And everyone has his or her very own miracle.
Oh, I did a menopause story, and then 4 years later, I was pregnant on the show.
So how many times have you died?
I've been presumed dead 3 times, yeah.
And dead once?
I flatlined on a Friday. I woke up on a Monday and walked out of the hospital on a Tuesday, yes.
I just want to know where my husband is, and I want to know now.
In the surreal world of the soaps, missing characters presumed dead routinely turn up again. And the medical help is somewhat dicey.
Dad, it could be benign, but we have to check it out.
Peter Simon and Michael O'Leary play the Bowers, father and son doctors.
I started May 1st of 1983. Started the show on a Friday. I was an orderly, changing bedpans. Monday, I was doing brain surgery with my father.
Was it successful?
No.
No.
The first of 38 days.
Pressure's still dropping.
You're renowned as a doctor who keeps losing his patients, correct?
Yes, regardless if it was a strep throat or whatever it is. It doesn't matter. They die fast.
The very longevity of the show blurs the line between fiction and reality. To many fans, some of the crises may hit very close to home.
She's very sick. She has leukemia.
What's wrong?
What makes you people so real to so many people?
Because they've watched oftentimes our birth, our marriage, and
deaths.
And our deaths.
We got a crash course on the Byzantine history of Guiding Light from veteran actors Ron Raines, 15 years on the show, Beth Chamberlain, 20 years, Tina Sloan, 26, Grant Alexander, 27.
There are these great stretches that the audience will grant you. You're allowed to send a child off at the age of 12 and bring them back 6 months later fully grown.
Or even the next
med
day,
school.
possibly.
They will accept all those kinds of things. They won't accept if you take a character and write it in a way that is completely inconsistent with what they have come to accept.
Tina Sloan's character, for instance. She's the saint of Springfield who survived breast cancer and countless other crises and slipped up just once.
One time in the entire history of my 26 years here, I slept with someone who was married to my best friend. And she died as a result of this because she was so upset she drove off a snowy cliff. And people have still not forgiven me, and this was 20 years ago.
There are no minor crises in these families.
No.
Something dramatic always happens at a big dinner,
Oh, yes.
family sitting
Yes.
down, at a wedding, at a funeral.
Indeed, funeral scenes are commonplace on Guiding Light. What with all the characters who've met mysterious deaths or been written out of the plot or simply succumbed to the good Dr. Bauer's ministrations. For the actors, though, taping this memorial hit home. A requiem, in a way, for the program itself.
I'm 54 years old. I will never have a job like this again, ever in my life. Nothing this steady and this stable and this wonderful.
The backstage story of Guiding Light is a rich one.
No. No.
Ned Holden confesses his love to his adopted sister, Mary Rutledge, in our next dramatic episode.
Here on the show's 70th anniversary, the actors recreated the radio version from the 1930s.
They see my light in the window, and they need guidance in their lives.
The original focus was inspirational, featuring a minister whose guiding light attracted the down and out, the lonely, and the troubled.
But does it feel right to you?
How could you deceive me like this? Doesn't our marriage mean anything to you?
In their heyday on radio, producing soaps was like printing money.
Does leaves things fluffy soft, too.
They got their name, soaps, or washboard weepers, by delivering the soap maker's dream, a captive audience.
Thank you.
Women across America stuck at home with the laundry and the kids. But times, they have been changing.
They've been going one by one. I worked on a show called The Doctors once. Does anybody remember that?
Former network executive and television historian Tim Brooks says the soaps hit their peak in the 1970s when the networks were running 16 of them. The passing of Guiding Light leaves just 7. How come?
It's that the world has changed. The world has turned, so to speak.
Afflicting the soaps. Women leaving home for the workplace. More and more competition from talk shows and so-called reality TV. And despite the casting of younger actors, a dwindling number of younger viewers willing to sit still for an hour a day.
The audience has gotten older, and as the soap operas have attracted more and more 50-plus, 60-plus audience, they've become less attractive to the soap manufacturers.
Action!
Seeing the handwriting on the wall, Guiding Light's executive producer, Ellen Wheeler, did everything she could to postpone the inevitable.
All right, here we go. Quiet, please.
She's a whirlwind on the set, where time is money.
Frank, shut up. I have speed. You have to tape now. You have to actually go to real work. Yeah.
Hustling cast and crew from scene to scene.
It's great to work at that speed. And if it was really good, we don't have time to pat ourselves on the back. But if it was really bad, we don't have to think about it either, because we've got to move on to the next one.
She cut costs by using smaller crews, smaller sets, turning, for instance, a basement storage room at CBS into Springfield's mini-mart.
You have no idea what you're missing.
You enjoy it.
You?
A lot of men try to pick up women in this play. Big pickup spot.
Though writer Jill Laurie Hurst and producer Wheeler knew the end was coming, accepting it was another matter.
We find that we still have so many stories we would love to tell.
We have to say goodbye to the characters, and we have to say goodbye to the whole town. We have to say goodbye to each other. Our working relationships are over.
That means not just the actors, but the production staff responsible for sorting out the thousands of details involved in doing an hour show Monday through Friday, soldiering on through the last few episodes.
Did you see the expiration date on that?
It's all coming to an end very soon.
It's sad. It is sad. The thing that I'm going to miss the most are the people. This is a family. This is my family away from my family.
As actor Frank Decopoulos notes, it's a tight-knit group, on screen and off.
I called you a bitch on the last episode.
But we're friends now. Okay,
Yeah.
so
Decopoulos has played the same character, a Springfield cop, for 22 years.
I'm really sorry, Miss Jane. I really am.
The thousands of actors who've passed through Springfield over the years include Callista Flockhart, Angela Bassett, Hayden Panettiere, Jimmy Smits, Taye Diggs, Allison Janney, and Kevin Bacon, a teen with a drinking problem.
Well, I could stop tomorrow if I wanted to.
Some amazing people have worked at Guiding
Amazing.
Light.
To be at the end, it puts a lot of fear in your heart. You want to be true to all the things they created and all love and hope that they gave to generations of people.
What's that last show going to be like for you people?
I think it won't sink in for maybe a month later that we're actually not going back. We're not just light on story right now. There is no story to be told.
Pass A, take one. Action.
We're just all so lucky to have each other, all of us, right?
And so they taped the final TV episode, number 15,762. Add to that roughly 4,000 radio shows, and you get, over the course of the program's life and death, 20,000 snapshots of Springfield. And now, time to look for work.
You go out there and do what actors do. They audition, roles come up, and that's the nature of the beast.
The ancient wisdom that there's a sucker born every minute has been especially pertinent given the financial disasters of the past few years. So it's time for a short and painless test. Are you sometimes just too trusting? Do you invest in things you don't really understand? Are you also a bit greedy? Then you too could be suffering from pigeon fever. Pigeons, just so you know, are what con men call their victims. After a year of revelations about Bernard Madoff, who cheated investors out of billions, you might think Americans have wised up. Fat chance. Prosecutors and regulators tell us that even in this age of skepticism, Ponzi schemes like Madoff's are thriving. One regulator even calls it ponzimonium. Why are there so many pigeons around? We asked a few people who should know. As a student of con games and deception, were you at all surprised by the Bernie Madoff scam?
Would you be surprised if I told you that I predicted it?
For starters, we approached Ricky Jay, America's foremost card sharp, actor, sleight-of-hand artist, a man with an encyclopedic knowledge of con men past and present. He told us of a talk he gave 7 years before Madoff's fall.
Beware of someone well-established in the industry.
A lecture on financial fraud to a gathering of police officers in 2001.
I would also beware of someone who will rely heavily on an affiliation with an investor group, be it religious, ethnic, or geographic.
He was describing Madoff to a T.
I think these elements will make the market ripe for any sort of pyramid or Ponzi scam, Ricky Jay.
And that is pure Bernard Madoff.
It's pure Bernie Madoff. But can I tell you another element of the con? That I actually made this page on Photoshop last night and put it into this bulletin. And I did that to prove a point. And the point is...
You got me.
Good. You set it up by saying that I was a student of cons and that I'm knowledgeable in that area, and so you allowed my supposed expertise to make you believe this is true. This magazine is true. I really have lectured to this group of police against confidence crime. Everything is true except for this page, which I slipped in last night.
So what's the moral? Trust no one.
We wouldn't want to live in a world where we couldn't be conned, because in effect we would then be living in a world where we mistrusted or refused to trust anyone. So this is the price we pay.
And pay we have. In the wake of the Madoff scandal, Ponzi perp walks have become a marathon. Texas financier Alan Stanford, accused of a $7 billion Ponzi scheme. Minnesota businessman Tom Petters, convicted recently of a $3 billion scam. And Park Avenue lawyer Mark Dreyer, mastermind of a mere $400 million Ponzi scheme that landed him first on 60 Minutes and then in federal prison.
I thought if somebody would ever interview me in a program such as yours, it would be for something good I've done, not something humiliating I've done.
Despite the downfall of the Dryers and the Madoffs, Ponzi operators large and small are busier than ever, knowing we're all capable of greed, misplaced trust, and something else.
I think it's anxiety. It's anxiety that you're losing out, that other people are doing better than you are.
Stephen Greenspan is a University of Colorado professor who writes and lectures on gullibility, warning audiences that not reading the fine print or buying something on a tip from your brother-in-law are bad ideas, and that older people are particularly vulnerable to a friendly pitch from a con man. In most of the great moments of gullibility in history, the perpetrator seems to target a particular group, correct?
Yes. There have been Mormon Ponzi schemes targeting Mormons or fundamentalist Christians. Madoff mostly was aimed at Jews because he was a prominent Jewish philanthropist. So yes, there is this affiliation aspect of it because we tend to trust our own kind.
Here in 1919 is Charles Ponzi, self-styled financial wizard, loafing at his Boston mansion with his lovely wife and proud and adoring mother.
Mr. Ponzi himself promised fellow Italian immigrants he could make them rich trading in postal reply coupons, sort of the prepaid phone cards of the day. Ponzi went to prison and died a pauper.
I went out looking for trouble. I found it.
But his name lives on off with a fraud he made famous.
The basic concept is robbing Peter to pay Paul. You have a fund of new money coming in, and you use the new money to pay the old investors, but at a certain point that has to stop.
Gullibility is at the very core of this, correct?
Absolutely. I mean, history is filled with examples.
Mr. J's library is replete with documents about cons, scams, and hoaxes of all kinds. Amazing animals.
And the cynocephalus was often featured on circus lots, and eventually people realized that the cynocephalus was a baboon wearing lederhosen.
Celebrated con men, including Count Victor Lustig.
This is an original wanted poster of the Count. One of the things he did in France was that he was able to sell the Eiffel Tower for scrap metal, and he was able to do it twice, which is sort of wonderful.
Mr. J reports that over the years, people really have tried to sell the Brooklyn Bridge, as well as Nelson's column in Trafalgar Square in London. And in another cautionary tale, still unfolding, pigeons were both the investors and the investment. Arlen Galbraith, who called himself the Pigeon King, convinced hundreds of American and Canadian farmers there was good money to be made raising the birds for food.
And everybody we talked to said this guy was on the up and up. Nobody had a bad word to say about him anywhere that we could find.
So Aaron and Jolene Humbert, Ohio farmers, signed up.
I've had such tremendous demand for the live birds.
The Pigeon King assured investors that pigeons would replace chickens in every pot in America and the world. He'd sell you breeding stock and buy back the offspring. Soon, barns across the Midwest and Canada were filled to the rafters with birds and high hopes.
He was building his herd, building the flock, as you would say.
He had to have so many hundreds of thousands of birds a week to supply his production.
But to some, including the Attorney General of Iowa, it sounded like a Ponzi scheme. Iowa and 3 other states barred the Pigeon King from doing business. And shortly after the Humberts bought in, Pigeon King International declared bankruptcy. The Humberts lost $300,000, most of it borrowed money.
We've contacted everybody in the states we could think of. And, you know, from elected officials to FBI to our local prosecutor. And everybody says, yeah, obviously there's something wrong here. It was a scam, but to prove it is going to be very difficult.
Galbraith declined our request for an interview. Canadian police now say he was running a Ponzi scheme. Do you blame yourselves at all?
To a point. We just didn't find the red flags popping up. So we tried it and then we lost.
Might as well went to Vegas and put it all on red.
We would have had a lot more fun.
At least in Vegas, you know the odds always favor the house. Elsewhere, even the most sophisticated among us can be had. For instance, our gullibility expert Stephen Greenspan, who, after writing a book on the subject, discovered he'd lost $400,000 of his retirement money to who else? Bernie Madoff. Was it embarrassing for you?
2 days after I had the first book copy in my hand, I found that out. Well, it was painful, obviously.
And the fact was, Greenspan had never even heard of Madoff. The hedge fund managing his retirement money had simply reinvested the $400,000 with Madoff.
I don't even think I read the prospectus. I trusted the people I was turning my money over to, and I've always done that, and it's usually worked well, except in this one case.
What did your wife say to you when you confessed that you'd lost part of your nest egg?
I told you so, because I had tried to talk her into it. And she said, I don't think so.
What made her suspicious?
Maybe it was the word hedge fund.
Which brings us to Wall Street and the financial meltdown of 2008. Poking through the wreckage, many experts believe the root cause was a perfect storm, a monsoon of gullibility colliding with a tidal wave of greed.
This was a massive Ponzi scheme, and it's the biggest crime against the American economy in our lifetimes. In fact, ever.
Janet Tavakoli is an analyst specializing in derivatives, the exotic financial instruments at the heart of the meltdown. She argues that the bad mortgage loans that fueled the crisis were were repackaged by investment banks, sliced into increasingly complex derivatives, and resold to other investors, even though the underlying mortgages were often virtually worthless.
You had various traders buying each other's products to artificially keep the prices up so that the bubble didn't collapse.
Not only that, but the mortgage derivatives being traded were so mind-numbingly complicated, nobody understood them fully. Certainly not the pigeons, the buyers at banks, mutual funds, pension funds, and insurance companies who wound up holding a bag full of worthless paper. These guys are smart guys. They're all graduates of the finest business schools in the country, correct?
Yes. If they were gullible, they're sophisticated investors. So they can't really go back to the investment banks that sold them this product and said, we've been had, because they held themselves out to be experts in these kinds of securities.
All of which proves that whether you're on Wall Street or Main Street, brain power is no defense against con men. In fact, smart guys may be the biggest suckers of all.
As someone who does sleight of hand for a living, to me the ideal audience would be scientists or Nobel Prize winners who are incredibly smart in their one area, and often, not always, have an ego with them which says, I am really smart, so I can't be fooled. No one is easier to fool. So Morley, I'm going to play you one hand of blackjack with certain propositions that make it too good to be true.
And so, determined not to be conned by him again, I sat down for a friendly card game with Mr. J.
You win all ties.
The rules were all stacked in my favor. I got 20, he showed a 9, meaning I thought it was impossible for him to win.
And God, the only thing that could beat you would be as if I had a 12 or something. Oh, which I do. You see, I have the 12 of clubs. So I have 21 to your 20.
But there's no such thing as a 12 of clubs, right? Wrong. Not only did Mr. J manipulate the cards somehow to get the ones he wanted, he was also dealing from a deck used in certain rummy games that includes 11s, 12s, and 13s. This pigeon had been had again.
And the other real element of the con is that I told you this was too good to be true. Anyone should stand clear of something that's too good to be true.
Because it never is.
Never is.
Despite some indications that the economy is recovering, the housing market remains a disaster area. Currently, about 7 million homeowners are behind on their mortgages, and that number's only getting worse. Banks, with the help of the government, are offering some relief to homeowners who've lost jobs and just can't meet their payments. But there's a growing number who can pay but are simply walking away from houses that are now worth as little as half of what they paid for them. It's called strategic default. People have done the math and decided making those monthly payments is just throwing money away, leaving the mortgage holders, the banks, as zookeepers of an ever-growing parade of white elephants. In the past year, it's estimated that at least 1 million Americans who can afford to stay in their homes simply walked away. Among them, Chris Diener and his wife Dana of Sun City, Arizona. West Foothill Drive has become a street of shattered dreams.
Amazingly, we have 16 out of the 44 houses on the street have foreclosed over the last year.
And yours over here?
Mine will be number 17.
When Diener, an auditor for a local university, bought his 3-bedroom house in 2006 for $262,000, he thought he got a bargain.
First-time home buyers, we don't know, houses are overvalued. We just know we need to get in before it keeps going up and up and up.
And then?
And then, boom.
The balloon burst. So how much does he think he could get for that $262,000 house today?
Right now, about $142,000.
That's a big drop.
Big drop. Over 43%.
Diener and his house were, as they say, underwater. With a mortgage of about $250,000 on a home worth less than $150,000, he has one very expensive lemon. He says he tried to talk his bank into renegotiating his mortgage, but because he earns enough to keep paying, the bank said no deal.
They refused to. They said it was going to affect my credit and they were going to take my house, and I pretty much said go for it.
But you could afford to stay here, correct?
I could, yeah.
But he chose not to. He's walking away. That lemon of a house is now the bank's problem.
It's almost like the in thing to do right now, it seems like.
And because Diener, like many Americans, only made a 10% down payment on his home, taking a hike is a lot easier. By law in Arizona and 9 other states, the bank cannot go after any of his other assets. But his credit rating will suffer. Aren't you fearful that you're going to get a reputation as being a deadbeat?
Yeah, but with the money savings that I will have in 4 to 6 years, I'm confident I will have enough money to buy my way into a house if I want.
So you don't feel even a twinge of guilt?
No, especially after dealing with my lender, trying to contact them. None at all.
Neither do Jean Ellen Schulich and Danny Kuhn. They bought their Phoenix bungalow 3 years ago for nearly $400,000. The bank now values it at $85,000. Even though they can afford the mortgage payments, they felt they were trying to bail out a notion with a bucket.
No logical business person would do anything other than walk away. And so there was a lot of soul searching, and I did a lot of crying because I'm in love with this house. And every day I would redo the math and think, maybe we missed something. This just can't be right.
But it was. The value of their house was dropping anywhere from $5,000 to $8,000 a month. So Schulich and Kuhn just felt it was time to walk away.
I don't think we're villains. We fulfilled the parts of our contract that we have with the bank. We've let them know what we're doing. It's all legal. It's not anything I ever expected I would be doing, and it sure doesn't feel good, but it seems like it's the right thing to do.
What do your neighbors make of it? Another empty house brings down the value of everyone's house.
And we've seen that here. I think they will be upset, and I understand that.
Yeah.
But you're hardly alone in Phoenix right now.
True.
It's interesting the number of my coworkers who have approached me to say, how are you doing this? Because I need to do it.
The Southwest has become an inland ocean of bad mortgage debt. Here in Arizona, a full 50% of houses are underwater. And next door in Nevada, it's even worse. 65% of houses there are drowning and the water's rising. And it's not just the Southwest. More than 11 million homeowners across the country are underwater. It's estimated that number could double in the next year, which means nearly half of all American mortgage holders will owe more on their homes than those homes are currently worth.
We've been through an event that none of us have ever experienced in this country since the Depression.
To try to stem the tide of foreclosures, the Commissioner of the Federal Housing Administration, David Stevens, says the Obama administration has set aside billions to give banks the incentive to help struggling and underwater borrowers with their mortgages. But banks have been slow to modify the terms of those loans.
The fact of the matter is, these programs are designed to affect those who are most at risk, who are unable to make their payments. And it does require the investor, the servicer to participate.
The decision to walk away from the sinking home
right.
By people who can't afford to pay is spreading like a virus. Because if one person on the street does it, the next door neighbor says, what am I doing? Why am I putting all this money into this almost worthless house?
The concern has to be, for someone who's going to take that move, is that they have to be so deeply in negative equity that they're willing to damage their credit, damage their financial reputation going forward. If you get foreclosed on in your home, you walk away from your mortgage, when you could have afforded it particularly, that's going to follow that family for years to come.
This is You Walk Away, calling in response to your online inquiry.
But Chad Rule, co-founder of a new business called YouWalkAway.com, says fears of the consequences are overblown.
People think that
if they're late on their payment or they defaulted, that a sheriff's going to come the next day and rip them out of the home. What we do is offer people a peace of mind right away that they know that's not going to happen.
I'm going to be here for you throughout the entire time, so you can always call.
The website urges underwater homeowners to unshackle themselves from their mortgage obligations and, for a price, walks them through the process of walking away.
Not even a mile.
Rule says his greatest challenge is convincing people that they are not immoral.
The biggest concern people have, our customers have, is this stigma of foreclosing and what will the neighbors think. But as more and more people are foreclosing, that stigma is wearing off. People are realizing now that there isn't shame in defaulting. The banks don't feel shame by foreclosing on a person's home.
So you're saying we should all be acting like bankers?
Sure, I mean, it's a business transaction.
Brent White, a law professor at the University of Arizona, says the moral issue is beside the point. In a controversial academic paper, he wrote that government and the banks exploit people's sense of shame to keep them from defaulting. White says more people should be walking.
You won't find a time in history where this many Americans were underwater on their mortgage. You won't find a time where this many people's homes are worth half of what they pay for their homes. These are unique times and things are different.
I mean, as a child of the Depression, let me tell you that the most shameful thing that could happen to you was to lose your house.
My argument is, in fact, that people feel too shameful about letting go of their home. And in fact, people might be better off making economic decisions, rational decisions in their best interest.
White says big businesses make such bottom-line decisions all the time. Morgan Stanley walked away from 5 San Francisco office buildings they bought at the height of the boom. And real estate developer Tishman Speyer defaulted on the huge $5.4 billion Stuyvesant Town apartment complex in New York City earlier this year when its value fell by nearly half, making it one of the biggest walkaways in real estate history. It's a trend the banks fear could catch on with average homeowners. Already, the CEO of Citibank's mortgage unit estimates that 1 in 5 borrowers who default on their mortgages are able to pay. If that number rises, it could jeopardize any economic recovery. No bank we contacted would talk publicly about strategic defaults, but all indicated they'd be unwilling in most cases to help underwater homeowners who can't afford to keep up their payments. And Commissioner Stevens agrees with the banks.
To simply allow anybody who just decides they don't want their home anymore, who signed a contract to purchase a home, to walk away and get some sort of write-off with a program backed by the administration or a financial institution creates a whole new set of standards that will live with us for years to come. The question is, who pays that bill?
For now, that bill is being paid by people like businessman Tom Hansen of Scottsdale, Arizona. He bought his dream house on Gold Dust Avenue 5 years ago. Much of the gold has evaporated, and he's left with a pile of dust.
I paid $1.2 million for the house.
What's its value today?
$850,000, if you can sell it.
While his friends are urging him to unload that monkey on his back, Hansen just can't bring himself to do it yet.
I just would not be comfortable walking away. And so, maybe at some point in time, I will walk away. But right now, I'm not.
What you're saying is it really comes down to conscience.
I think it does.
You could probably rent a pretty grand house at lower rent than you're paying right now as mortgage payments.
Absolutely, could. Probably half.
I mean, you are attached to the house, correct? I mean, it's
I am. Yeah. I love the house. So I'd have to go find a house that I liked better.
It's an expensive love affair.
Aren't they all?
But the Deaners, who stopped paying their mortgage 5 months ago, plan to stay in their house for free until the bank forecloses in July. Then, with all the money they saved, they plan to rent a nicer, cheaper house for a few years while his credit recovers. There are people saying if everybody did what you're doing, the country would be in even bigger, deeper trouble than it is right now.
If that starts happening, that's for the professionals to figure out.
How did you used to feel about people who walked away?
I thought initially it was immoral. My family raised me to believe that you should take care of your contract liabilities and your debt. That's how I was brought up to be.
Live within your means.
Live within your means, yeah. And that's what I've done.
So you don't feel any responsibility for it?
Unfortunately, no, I don't.